So it turns out Sir Keir Starmer himself was spreading fake news. And to hear all about it, watch the rest of my video and please do subscribe for a fresh alternative to the mainstream media for things you might not hear from them from a practicing barrister who is completely independent, has no ties to anybody, and I will tell you what's really going on and how the law really applies. So please do subscribe and I'll appreciate that. So what are we talking about? So some people have said that Sir Keir Starmer may himself be in breach of the Online Safety Act. Is that the case? Probably not, but hear me out and we'll have a discussion about it. So what are we talking about here? So you'll remember Sir Keir Starmer said that these riots were started by what he called the far-right agitators.
I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we've seen this weekend. Be in no doubt, those that have participated in this violence will face the full force of the law.
Now, pausing for thought there for a moment, that's a term that frustrates me because I think it's so wrongly often used and ironically causes further frustrations on the underlying issues and principles because it tends to ignore the underlying issues and the underlying concerns. Now, don't get me wrong, I in no way support any of the violence, any of the riots. I don't support attacking or, opposing the police in the streets. I think that's just a silly thing to do, and much less smashing up shops, looting shops and attacking each other and all that sort of stuff. All of that I absolutely condemn. But I also condemn the blanket use of the term far right, because that just suggests that everyone is wrong, no one should be having any concerns, and labelling them all far right seems to me to be a bit of a lazy way to suggest that they're all wrong. Well, ironically, that statement itself was wrong, because now we have the Pakistani authorities saying that one individual and his news agency were in fact the first people to wrongly report that this attacker of those poor girls was an asylum seeker. Of course, we now know that not to be true, and that information many people obviously believed was the spark of the riots and so on. And it was said to be that it was the, quote, far right that were responsible for spreading this misinformation. And indeed, they've been charged and sent to prison for various offences, which I've discussed in previous videos. So to have a bit more outline of those, check out my other video with Al earlier this morning over on Black Belt Secrets, where you can go and hear what we think about people being sent to prison. Are they being pressured into pleading guilty and so on? Go and check that video out there. But let's get back to the Online Safety Act. And is Sir Keir Starmer really in any trouble? Probably not, and for the reasons I'll explain. Now, the Online Safety Act introduced what you could probably best understand as a fake news offence, communications offence. That is where, under Section 179, a person sends a message that conveys information that they know to be false. And at the time of sending it, they intend the message or the information in it to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm to a likely audience, the likely audience just being whoever is likely to hear that information and take note of the information that's conveyed, and of course that the person has no reasonable excuse for sending the message. Now, even working in reverse order, you may not think that it's a reasonable excuse to say what he said, even though what he said was wrong, but it might be a reasonable excuse if the intent were to deter further violence and disorder and so on. So straight away, there might be some kind of defence there. But did he know that the information was false? And did he intend it to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm to a likely audience? Well, probably not is the answer to both of those. He probably didn't know that it was false. He might well have believed that it was true. He might have been given information to say that it was true. Now, I'm not saying that it was a good thing to have said. I don't, as it happens. I think a neutral approach would have been better. Everybody stop the violence kind of message and, acknowledge whatever the underlying concerns were at the same time and say, we will discuss those things, but this is not the way of doing it. I would have supported a message that said, no one is to do any violence, no one's to do any fighting, everyone should go home, everyone should calm down. If you are involved, whatever side of this argument you're on, if you are caught doing any of these things, you will be charged and sent to prison. But for now, go home and we'll then discuss the underlying issues. That might have been a much better approach, which I think, with respect to Sir Keir Starmer, I think that would have had a much better reception and been much better for reputation management for the government. But to label the whole thing a far-right riot was, in my view, the wrong thing to do, and as it turns out, wrong, according to the Pakistani authorities, saying that this one individual and his agency were in fact the original source of this misinformation, which then spread, and which probably did then lead to further sparks of misinformation and sending messages and so on. So all of this was a snowball effect. That's really why they turn into riots, because otherwise they are just pockets of disorder and a series of isolated violent disorder incidents. But taken together, if there are 12 or more people, it's a riot. Now, I know there's some reluctance to refer to these as a riot, but that's what it is. If there's 12 people involved and it's a series of violent incidents, then it's going to be termed a riot. But to have come out as the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister of a new government, to say that this was all the far right, obviously was just ripe for backfire. Now, he may have been right, but as it turns out, this man has now been charged in Pakistan for his alleged role in spreading false information claims before the UK riots. And this just shows how you really do need to stop and think, not just what the headline says or what the article says, but if there's further information, or if it's to do with a charge or there's a judgment, let's say it's a legal case, I don't ever rely on the headline. I mean, I am just as susceptible as anybody else to see a headline that might spark some kind of emotion. It might spark some kind of response. That's what they are designed for. Now, there are certain exemptions for recognized news companies when it comes to spreading misinformation and things like that, because news companies can get this wrong. Individuals don't have that exemption. They don't have that excuse. So if you as an individual spread something, send a message, convey a message on a network or something that turns out to be conveying false information, if you know that it is false and you intend it to have non-trivial psychological or physical harm, then you could be responsible for committing this offence. So if you see an article or a post or something else and you are tempted to post something yourself, quoting it, particularly if it's only based on the headline or simple wording of a post, I'd be very, very careful, and I would urge you not to do that unless you've really read the full thing, because if you just do it on the headline or even just the article, you may miss information and then you may be reckless as to the truth. Because the big problem that I see here is, and this is where it's going to be a real attack or potential attack on free speech, is if you convey false information and let's say you do intend it to cause some harm, but the question mark is over whether or not it's false, then it's unclear really as to how they're going to prove that you knew the information was false. And it may be the case that they argue that it was sufficient, that you were sufficiently reckless as to the truth of the information that you conveyed. So if you just shared something without really checking that it was true, they might say that you knew it was false because you were reckless as to whether it was true. And that just might sound like legalese. And that's the first time I'm actually using that term properly in one of my videos, because that's how I feel it is. I really feel that that's might be how they use this new act, this new legislation. An act is law, by the way. Watch the comment section go crazy. But that might well be how this is now looked at, because they might say if you were sufficiently reckless as to the truth of the information that you conveyed in a message or a post or whatever, and they show that the purpose of sending it was to say, this is really bad, isn't it? And you sent that message with a view to causing some kind of psychological harm, non-trivial psychological harm, whatever. That might be how this is prosecuted. So that is why some people have suggested that Sir Keir Starmer himself might ironically have breached this himself, because it's unclear at the moment precisely how these are going to be prosecuted. I understand that a few cases have been selected as test cases for this new offence, and I can't see really how it's going to work. I really can't see that, because how are you going to prove sufficiently that someone knew something was false when they posted it? Because surely if they post it, they think that it's real. Just like surely when Sir Keir Starmer said it's all the far right causing these riots, surely he believed that. In sparking these riots with that information that was conveyed that was wrong about the identity of that attacker, which now we know the information was wrong, and now we understand that someone has been charged in Pakistan for spreading that wrong information. And so that just shows how even the Prime Minister himself can get these things wrong. And so I urge you, before you share these things and you share information, to be very careful about it. But I thought that was worth sharing with you. Even though I'm out and about, clearly, I'm not driving for the avoidance of doubt. I am stationary in a car park, but I thought that was worth sharing. Leave me your thoughts and comments below. Check out my video with Al earlier today talking about the offences and whether or not people are being forced to or pressured into pleading guilty. Check that out. I'll link it below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.